Because so much of the results are derived from qualitative data, it is difficult to determine the reason why or how one country may be happier or deemed happier than another country solely based on the numerical value provided on the Gross National Happiness Index. In order to find out the reason why or how, references back to the individual characteristics of the country that resulted in such gross national happiness values must be made. However, this may defeat the entire purpose of having the index to begin with if people are required to refer back to the characteristics. Also, there may be problems as the gross national happiness states that the people of the country are rather happy based on a bunch of criteria. However, they are simply assuming that the people will be happy based on certain characteristics, and therefore they are able to correlate these factors such as the well-being of the environment to the happiness of the inhabitants, and this will be further discussed by Mr. Rodney Stair.
Thank you, Kevin, and hello. My name is Rodney Stair, and I will be covering the second half of this presentation on the knowledge issues of gross national happiness. Before I address the knowledge issues related to measuring emotion, I'd first like to briefly examine the sort of happiness that is being measured by the GNH index and the importance of measuring happiness. Is it a need or is it a luxury? Understanding that happiness is not a simply defined emotion characterized by a simple linear definition, let us take into account one of its meanings. Happiness is defined as a state of well-being characterized by emotions ranging from contentment to intense joy. When attempting to define a word, one must be able to define all of its possible meanings, whilst at the same time being as concise as possible, in order to avoid misinterpretations of the word. Even then, however, mistakes in interpretations are still prevalent because words that contain multiple levels of meaning may not have a balanced use of all of its definitions, which may result in the accidental combining of all the definitions of the word into one single idea. Happiness is an example of this. As stated within the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, there are two senses of happiness. A, the ordinary usage of happiness, is usually in reference to the brief feeling of bliss or contentment that results from achievement or any other means. The other usage refers to happiness as satisfaction of one's cumulative life. This is a relative sort of happiness as, for example, any number of positive events can render a person's life satiable, regardless of how pitiable one's life may be. In terms of gross national happiness, Bhutan is measuring satisfaction in all aspects of common life: standard of life, environmental, physiological, psychological, etc. This leads to another issue. If we are measuring gross happiness in a society, we are saying that its presence should be necessary. A question then arises: is happiness a need or a luxury? Arguably, it can be said that humans do not require happiness to minimally function, and thus we cannot completely designate happiness as a basic need. On the other hand, in a materially driven society, one can say that happiness is something of a luxury, in the sense that although it is something that is wanted by many, it is hard to achieve whilst keeping in consideration the need to get a proper education, a well-paying job, the ability to support a family, to pay off one's mortgage or debt, or, for example, in the pursuit of ideals such as the American dream, which, for characters such as Mr. Wilson from The Great Gatsby, ended in the futile sacrifice of vitality in order to gain unobtainable prosperity and happiness. This attitude towards happiness as a hard-to-achieve luxury is best summed up by this quote by Soren Kierkegaard. Most men pursue pleasure with such breathless haste that they hurry past it. In concern to measuring happiness and reducing it to numerical values, or emotions in general, there are various ways of doing so. In the course of this presentation, I will look at two proposed methods of measurement. First of all, emotions can be measured through behavioral reactions, such as body language, expressive reactions, physiological reactions, such as change in heartbeat, and subjective feelings. Save for the last, these indicators of emotion can be measured by nonverbal means. For example, we can monitor facial expressions by means of video recording or by electrodes that are meant to measure movement of muscle tissue on the face. We can also look at pitch, changes in pitch, and articulation. And we can also, for physiological reactions, we can measure blood pressure and brain activity and try to make connections between the results of stimuli and their association to various emotions. The perceived strengths of these methods, who are nonverbal, is that they do not disturb the participants. This, of course, is a knowledge claim which will be immediately assessed after this next point, and that it is far more reliable than self-assessment of emotions. However, as a form of measurement, these methods are highly inefficient in the sense that in order to attain accurate data, the observer effect, which are changes in the natural behavior as a result of foreign presence, must be counteracted. To do so, habituation is necessary over a long period of time. So even though this method is far more objective than surveying the population, it still primarily bases its claims on correlation. It takes factors such as increased heart rate, changes in blood pressure, and ties them to specific emotions by means of human reason and induction. And even if links are established, can nonverbal measurements be able to determine what are the physiological, vocal, and facial differences between like emotions such as sadness, depression, anhedonia, stress, and fatigue, which, as I mentioned before, are all really similar emotions? How does one distinguish between simple fatigue and depression? After all, fatigue and anhedonia are part of the numerous symptoms that are linked to depression. How do we distinguish between the whole and the parts that make it up? In other words, how do we distinguish between the symptoms and the main issue? So even then, regardless of its benefit of increased objectivity, it cannot be used to measure happiness and reduce it to numerical values, because the satisfaction of one's life cannot be measured by collecting raw, nonverbal data. One cannot deduce from physiological, expressive, and behavioral reactions over a long period of time that a person is content with their life. Satisfaction is not something that can be viewed or measured by an external presence, which is, as we know, linked to the Verstehen position. After all, satisfaction is often attained by reflection upon one's circumstances and determining if they're favorable or not. This then limits the options to the use of surveys, which are equally as fallacious as the other alternative. First of all, we have to take into consideration that the language within the survey is inefficient as a descriptor, as it is severely limited in its ability to describe various thought processes that one may undergo over